We start. Okay, great. Thank you. Why don't we start? Again, I'm Mike Makovsky, I'm the President and CEO of GINSA. I'm honored to have my old friend and a very distinguished expert, Ambassador Michael Herzog. Excuse me. Um, Mike, Ambassador Herzog, as I'm sure you all know, was Israel's ambassador to Washington. He was picked by then Prime Minister, I believe, Naftali Bennett, the coalition government. But given Mike's relationships on both sides of the aisle in Israel for a long time, he remained as ambassador under Prime Minister Netanyahu. He served from November 2021 till January of 2025, which obviously included October 7th and the ensuing war against Hamas and the whole Iranian front. He also is a retired brigadier general in the IDF, serving in intelligence, strategic planning. He has a long history. He's one of the before he was ambassador, I think one of the leading national security experts in Israel, and had been involved previously in peace negotiations with the Palestinians, among other issues. Mike, it's terrific to have you. Thank you very much for joining us, and happy Passover.
Thank you very much, Mike. Pleasure to be with you. Happy Passover to everybody.
Okay, thank you. This is one of, I think, your first public events since you stepped down as ambassador a couple months ago, and the time to talk to you couldn't be better. I want to talk. Excuse me, I'm just dealing at the end of a cold here. Obviously, the most, I think, pressing issue for Israel right now and for America in the Middle East is these Iran talks. And let me just, to bring the audience together on this, before I ask you, there have been the administration, as everyone knows, the Iranians and sent their foreign minister, and the Trump administration sent special presidential advisor, negotiator Witkoff to Oman. They spoke on Saturday. There were indirect talks. They met briefly together, but the talks generally were indirect. Before the talks, Witkoff indicated that, the objective is really to dismantle, but our real red line is weaponization, which certainly raised eyebrows. He then gave an interview last night on Fox where he talked about that the Iranians could be allowed to enrich to 3.67%. There'd have to be clear verification. Then today, it seems like after just piecing things together, what's been in the news, there was a meeting in the Situation Room to discuss these talks, and Witkoff posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, indicating that actually, and I give you the exact quote here, that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program, and which went against, apparently reversed what he was saying last night on Fox, and what he said coming into the negotiations. One last point I'll add, and then I'll ask you this question, Mike. When Prime Minister Netanyahu recently met with President Trump, he made it clear that dismantlement was the Israeli objective of the Iranian nuclear program, and you had senior U.S. officials, including President Trump, basically saying the same thing. So what sense do you make of all this? What is the Israeli interest in these negotiations? And what sort of deal, if there is one, would you like to see?
So to begin with, I would like to talk about the time sensitivity of dealing with the Iranian nuclear issue. I believe that 2025 should be a year of decisions on this program for a variety of reasons. To begin with, the Iranian program has reached a very, very dangerous point. So you cannot postpone dealing with it seriously any longer. If you follow the reports of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, you see that in terms of enrichment, Iran amassed enriched uranium in various levels from 3.5% to 60%. All in all, this amount is sufficient to produce 17 bombs in 4 months if they decide to weaponize their program. The amount of uranium enriched to 60%, which is near weapon grade, could suffice for 6 bombs. And if Iran decides to enrich, to break out to 1 bomb's worth of military-grade uranium, it could do so in a week, maybe even less than a week. So this is very dangerous. And Iran never stopped also looking into weaponization or dealing with weaponization-related activities. There were reports in recent months that Iran was looking at ways to shorten the time frame required to weaponize its program, if and when it decides to do so. And we've also seen reports that some people around the supreme leader are urging him to change a doctrine that for now does not allow to go for weaponizations. And Iran has been dealing for many years with delivery systems. So that program has reached a very dangerous point. The second element, as far as time sensitivity is concerned, is a huge opportunity that we have today. Following the war that we were thrown into with the Iranian Axis, Iran and its proxies. In recent months, Israel hit hard on the Iranian air defense system, the most sophisticated part of it, the S-300, and took them out, and Iran became blinded, vulnerable, more exposed. We hit very hard on Hezbollah, which was built by design to serve as a shield to the Iranian nuclear program. The Iranians provided them with around 200,000 projectiles in order to deter the U.S. and Israel from striking the Iranian nuclear program and being able to respond if we do. And that is no longer the case, because Hezbollah is today significantly degraded and shadow of what it used to be. And the whole Iranian axis is much weaker than it used to be. Syria crumbled, the regime of Assad collapsed, and Israel took out all the air defense capabilities that were there in that theater, which also limited our ability to take action against Iran. So taken together, there's a major opportunity, but that window is not open forever. At one point it will close, Iran will rebuild its capabilities, Iran will harden its nuclear facilities, so the opportunity is now, but not forever. There's also opportunity in terms of the Iranian economic situation, which is very dire now and deteriorating by the day. And finally, when we talk about the time frame, I would like to remind everybody that in October of this year, the remaining limitations set on the Iranian nuclear program by the JCPOA at the time, but enshrined by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, are going to expire. And first and foremost, the ability to snap back international sanctions on Iran, which is a major tool. So taken together, decision about the Iranian nuclear program have to be taken quite soon or in the course of the coming months. The U.S. has opted for diplomacy, and that's understandable. I hope that the talks will be fully direct and not indirect through mediators. I think we have a bad experience with that. But talking about the substance of diplomacy, the question is, what exactly is the U.S. going to insist? What model is it going for as a diplomatic outcome? Our Prime Minister when he visited President Trump, spoke about the Libya model. The Libya model is a high standard, which means totally dismantling the nuclear program, destroying, shipping out, dismantling everything, nothing is left there. I think the chances that Iran will accept such an outcome out of diplomacy are near zero. But there are also other models that you can talk about. There is a model of allowing Iran to have a nuclear program, but denying them the ability to enrich uranium or deal with plutonium on their own soil, so that they do not master the fuel cycle, and to the extent that they need anything for their peaceful program, they can get it from the outside. It's what's called the golden standard. Countries like the UAE signed agreements with the United States that they can develop a nuclear program, but under the golden standard, namely that they do not master the fuel cycle on their own soil. I think that's also a model that you can look at. And there is then a lower level, a lower standard, which is allowing Iran to maintain its nuclear infrastructure, to enrich to lower levels, and to be subjected to rigorous inspection. But that's a problematic model. I mean, I'm not sure where exactly the Trump administration stands, because we hear different statements, some of them conflicting. But what Mr. Witkoff said yesterday, implying that they could enrich to 3.67% and be subjected to inspection, I think for Israelis this model is troubling, because inspection comes and goes. Iranians know how to bypass it, know how to play with it. And I must say, for us in Israel, and as someone who dealt with it for many, many years, our red line was always not Iran actually rushing to the bomb, but developing the capacity to rush to the bomb in short order. And that's why Israelis are concerned about Iran maintaining its nuclear infrastructure. So again, I don't know exactly where the U.S. administration is headed in this respect. The fact we hear different statements may indicate that there is still an internal argument within the administration. Well, what I want to emphasize are the concerns that people in Israel have about this. And these are that either Iran will drag negotiations endlessly without any outcome in order to buy time, and use that time to develop its program, to close our window of opportunity to take action against it, to harden their facilities, and so on. Or alternatively, that the dynamic of negotiations will get concessions out of the US, so that the deal is not robust enough. Again, the jury's out. I don't know exactly where we're headed. It all just started.
Hey, let me follow up with you on a couple of things you said, please. One was just on the procedure. Some people might think, what's the difference between direct negotiations and indirect? And you said that Israel had a bad experience with indirect talks. So could you just address that?
So I think that when you talk about such a strategic issue, with such consequences for international stability, for the regional stability in the US, for Israel, this is a major national security issue for us. You don't conduct such negotiations through mediators. You have to do it directly, face to face. In the JCPOA, I mean, the US and Iran were there in the same room, but the Europeans played a major role. And I can tell you that during the Biden administration, there were indirect talks through Oman, and to the best of my knowledge, these were not very productive. So I think the US has to insist on direct talks. It cannot just be done through others.
And that's what President Trump actually was saying was emphasizing beforehand. Let me ask you also on this issue of weaponization and enrichment. And I also want to ask you about missiles. On the issue, when when Witkoff initially said our focus is on weaponization, and now again today he indicated seemingly after this senior meeting in the White House that it's both. Is it what is maybe you could explain just a little more if it was just weaponization, but they were allowed to enrich to 367. Could you please just explain why that would be a problem or there might be a problem for Israel?
First, I think negotiations have to include missiles as well, because missiles are the delivery system for nuclear weapons. When we talk about the nuclear program, there are three major components, which are the enrichment, the fissile material, the weaponization, and then the delivery system. So any talks about the Iranian nuclear program have to address all of these. Now, when you talk about enriching to lower levels of enrichment, 3.67, it is still, as we all know, about 70% of the road to ultimate military grade enrichment. So jumping from 3.67 to higher levels, military levels, is not such a problem for the Iranians, and that is why, as I said, our concern is not only about whether or not they rush to the bomb, but about the very infrastructure that allows them to do so. So we have to wait and see what exactly develops in these negotiations. The Iranians have made it clear that they will never accept a Libya model. I don't know what other models they might accept. They may try and go to a JCPOA-like model with some concessions to the West to buy time and then wait out Trump and avert a military option. But we have to be aware of all of these possibilities.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about the military option, but one more question. I guess just to clarify one more thing, just that you talked about, and you talked about Iran was in a weaker state. You were ambassador, obviously, during a unique time in Israeli history that included October 7th and the war that began. And do you think that there are experts that say there isn't evidence that the Iranians are weaponizing, and therefore it's less urgent? The other side of the argument I seem to gather, and I think this seems to be the Israeli position, is it's less about weaponization, but it's about opportunity, which is what you were suggesting. Iran is weaker now, and so on, and that its opportunity is trumping the weaponization. And I guess, do you think that there's a change in the way Israel is looking at its defense posture since October 7th? Is it more preemptive? It doesn't want to wait to the last minute to try to address threats, because sometimes you don't have, what you think might be the last minute actually comes earlier than you expect. I don't know. Maybe you could,
So first, we believe, and I believe, that Iran never abandoned its ambitions to become a nuclear armed state. What they did under international pressure 20 some years ago was to, when they were rushing to weaponization, they changed course and adopted a different strategy of becoming a nuclear threshold state. But for us, a nuclear threshold state is also dangerous, because you could be at a situation where they are very close to the threshold, and they can cross it without you having the ability to stop them when they do so. If they have such amount of fissile material, they can just blind the inspection. They can enrich to 90% levels, which are military grade, in a week, and then they can hide it somewhere and take the time to weaponize. That's a very dangerous scenario. We cannot live under this shadow all the time. That is why we in Israel have always said that we do not relate only to the very action of moving to a weapon, but the very capacity that allows Iran to do so in short order. I think that as far as Israel is concerned, this is definitely all the more emphatic after October 7, because what we learned from October 7, I think this calls for adjustments in Israel national security doctrine, is that we cannot just wait and allow our enemies to build their capabilities and rely only on deterrence, on the fact that we'll know in real time, and then we'll have time to thwart their intentions once they make a decision to hit us. It's not good enough, and I think one of the conclusions is that we have to deny them the ability, not allow them to build those capabilities beforehand. That's what we've been doing in Lebanon. That's what we've been doing in Syria and elsewhere. And I assume the same case applies to Iran.
Okay. And I guess these questions are, well, let me ask you one more thing about these talks and then about the military option. If there is a deal with the Iranians that the Israelis find unacceptable, how do you think that how do you think this government in Israel would react to that? Would that prevent them from acting militarily? Would them, um, um, it might be different under Trump than it was under Biden. And I guess that does also relate to the question, of course, of what does Israel need the United States? Does it need it as a partner? Does it need a green light from the United States? Or at least it's saying don't not at least it's saying at least it's not saying don't do this. How do you see all this?
So all Israeli governments, not only this government, but all Israeli governments stated that Israel will not allow Iran to go nuclear, and that will take the necessary action. And Israel built a military option in order to be able to do so. We have operational capabilities, which are quite strong. Obviously, the US has much better capabilities, being a superpower. I think to deal with it effectively, we do need the US, first of all, in some of its military capabilities, also assuming Iran will respond and hit Israel with numerous missiles. The US plays a role in help defending Israel, but I think there's also a strategic element to the picture, which is we need the US for the day after or the year after. Assuming Iran, after it is hit, will probably kick out the international inspection, try to blind the international community, go underground and may rush to the bomb. It definitely could change its doctrine and allow for weaponization. So we need the United States for the day after to be able to prevent Iran from doing so, deter and prevent Iran, because I think it would be difficult for Israel to shoulder this mission alone. That is why I believe that if we meaning either the Israel or the US or both of us together, but if we decide to go down the military road, military option, then it has to be done in a way that takes out all the main components of the Iranian nuclear program so that they cannot apply this scenario of going underground and rushing to the bomb, because we will deny them the ability. They will not have the capabilities and the infrastructure to do so. So any military strike has to be strong and robust enough and deal with all of these components. And obviously, Israel and the US doing it in a coordinated way or together, also coordinated strategically, is hugely important.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you also about the internal issue. Well, before I get to that, let me just ask you one more thing on the military option. You gave an interview I can't remember, it was a few weeks ago, I think it was, expressing that you could put it in the diplomatic way. You put it better than I would, of course, but your frustration over the last year with the Biden administration when they blocked certain weapons coming to Israel, I guess since Israel went into Rafah and Gaza. And there was the certain obvious blockage, and then there was maybe the slow rolling of approval of other weapons. My colleague Blaise Mishtal and I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal last November listing all the weapons beyond the 2,000 bombs that were being stopped. It seems like President Trump has actually um, unblocked those. And I gathered from talking to senior Israeli defense folks when I was in Israel a few weeks ago that that issue has pretty much been resolved under President Trump. Is that your sense that Israel really kind of has what it needs now?
Yeah, to be fair, the Biden administration gave us a lot of munitions and weapon systems and an unprecedented supplemental. At the same time, they blocked some munitions, first and foremost, the 2,000-pound bombs, which are critical for us in conducting the war in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And others were slowed down. I think that is currently resolved. And we do have what we need. But again, if we are going to apply a military option against Iran, this is a different ballgame than anything we've done vis-a-vis Hezbollah or in Gaza. Iran is a big country with a huge arsenal of missiles and other capabilities. So this has to be meticulously planned and carried out.
Okay. Let me ask you then turn to the internal issue with Iran. There was a New York Times article, I think it was Friday, that suggested, that reported that based on a couple of sources in Iran, that senior Iranians went to the supreme leader, said, look, you need had said you need to have these talks with the U.S. because if you don't, there's going to be military action. And if there's military action, it could destabilize the regime. And if you could maybe address how you see the internal Iranian situation right now.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because I think the internal scene in Iran is a very important element in this whole picture and this whole equation. I've been following this for many years, and I believe there's a real divide between the regime and the majority of the population. In my view, the regime lost the majority of the population. There is a deep divide there. Currently, the Trump administration is not talking about a regime change as a matter of policy. It's talking about resolving the nuclear issue, and then Iran can live happily ever after. But I think there is a huge strategic long-term opportunity, and at a minimum, I would advise to develop long-term strategy that would deepen this divide, much the same as the U.S. has done with the Soviet Union at the time, until the Soviet Union collapsed. It may take a lot of time, but this is a huge vulnerability of the regime. I think what we read in New York Times reflects that. There is the economy is in shambles. People are very unhappy. I don't believe that the people support the regime investing money in building its military might or supporting Hezbollah or Hamas or other proxies across the Middle East at the expense of investing in Iran itself and the well-being of its own population. I don't believe they would support a nuclear Iran at the expense of their own well-being, something I researched in the past. So there is a vulnerability that could be used. First and foremost, if you are going to diplomacy to extract a better deal. But in any case, I think this is a strategic potential game changer for the future.
Yeah, let me follow up on that because, it's really incredible. It seems to me you have a country like Iran with one of the largest natural gas reserves in the world, and they can heat people's homes and businesses because they haven't developed their natural gas industry, or they diverted their resources into nuclear, the nuclear program, or their proxies against Israel. For whatever the reason, or pure incompetence, or all the above, it is rather amazing to me. And I guess, uh, as you referenced about a happy ever after, do you think even if there is a nuclear deal, that sanctions on Iran should be removed, or that the objective, as you kind of hinted towards, should be regime collapse? I can tell you, I've argued that a few years ago, maybe starting about 5 years ago or longer, actually, that we shouldn't do anything to enrich this regime. And therefore, I wonder, even if we had a nuclear deal that removed their nuclear facilities, if the regime is still in power, should we remove our sanctions, or should
So
we move on?
let me remind you and everybody that sanctions on Iran cover a range of issues. We are now focused on sanctions on the nuclear program, what facilitates the nuclear program, but there are sanctions as regards to human rights, as regards to support of terrorism, regards to Iran supporting its and building its proxy networks, the Iranian military investment and missiles program, and so on. And I think that even if there is a deal reached between the U.S. and Iran, the sanctions should not be lifted on all other areas, including human rights. They should continue to apply. Iran should not be exempt just because it's doing a nuclear deal.
And if there's military action, and let's say a military operation that destroyed, or you can't expect, I assume, 100%, but that would damage a significant amount of the program. Would you want to keep those sanctions on to ensure Iran doesn't have the wherewithal to or to rebuild its program?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about the military option, it doesn't begin and end in like one operation. You have to assume that Iran will respond. They will probably fire numerous missiles at Israel. They will probably fire at American interests in the Middle East, or American facilities and bases, and so on. They might do other things, including leave the NPT and kick out the inspection, which is a very dangerous move. So any military option, in my view, should be accompanied by deterrent messages to the Iranians. Namely, if you do A, B, C, then there will be consequences, and part of these consequences are also additional sanctions.
And I'm glad you mentioned warning the regime. Let me go back to the military option for a second, because you mentioned that obviously the United States is a superpower, and we have certain capabilities that Israel does not have. But I guess if Israel did initiate a military operation, even without U.S. partnership, it seemed to me that the one obvious shared interest, besides preventing a nuclear Iran, is that you want to prevent a military operation from expanding into a regional war, and that it'd be incumbent upon the United States, because we could do it in a way that Israel cannot, to make sure to warn the regime in Tehran not to expand this into a war. And it seemed like that would be a strong U.S. interest.
No, absolutely. But I must say that Iran is in a weaker position today to instigate the regional war, because Hezbollah, as I said, is a shadow of what it used to be. Also weakened politically in Lebanon. It's a very different ballgame in Lebanon today. Syria collapsed, and the regime there, for what it might be, is very anti-Iran and anti-Hezbollah. And so the whole Iranian axis is in a different place today. Iran still has capabilities. As I said, it will fire missiles at Israel and US bases, but its ability to instigate a regional war is considerably weakened compared to 6 months or a year ago.
Right. So, you mean that's to also allay fears of some folks here in the United States that military action could lead to a war, and you're saying that Iran doesn't have the capability. I actually wanted to ask Stelia for one question on Gaza, but before I do you have any other concluding comments you want to make about the Iran situation?
As I said, 2025 should be a decision year on the Iranian nuclear program. There is a need, there is an opportunity, there is a limited time frame to do so, and so things have to be decided rather quickly. I know the U.S. administration set a time frame of 2 months. I'm not sure what you can do in 2 months. It's a very ambitious time frame. On the other hand, because of that, the Iranians are now saying, let's have an interim deal, which is also dangerous because it could buy them time. But we should all remember that sometimes no deal is better than a bad deal. I'm not saying the U.S. is heading to a bad deal. I'm just raising some concerns about where things might head.
Okay. And I know there'd be a lot to ask you about your time as ambassador. We could do that in another Zoom. But if I could ask you one question about Gaza, it was reported today, for instance, that the new chief of staff of the IDF, Eyal Zamir, saying that given Israeli military forces that they're bringing to bear in Gaza, it's a fantasy to think that you could take over. What is the Israeli interest right now in Gaza? I mean, is it still remain get the hostages out and defeat Hamas as a military force? Is that what they're trying to do right now?
Israel defined several goals for its war with Hamas after October 7th, and they were to destroy Hamas militarily, to remove the threat from Gaza, to remove Hamas from power in Gaza, and to release the hostages. I'm not placing them in specific order, but all of them are important. What we did over the last year and a half is that we did defeat Hamas militarily. They don't have the same capacity they had at the beginning of the war, but we are lagging behind in terms of removing them from power. Hamas is still strong in Gaza, still controls Gaza, and we still need to develop a coherent strategy, not only for destroying them, but of who takes over, who will replace them. I think that it's not in Israel's interest to reoccupy Gaza, to run the lives of the people there. We've been there. It's not in our interest, and I don't believe that this is where the preference of our government, even though there are people in Israel who advocate that. So we need to find some partners in order to deal with what's called the day after Hamas in Gaza. We still have the big issue of the hostages, and the debate in Israel is about the order of precedence. I mean, everybody agrees that we have to release the hostages and defeat Hamas and topple Hamas. But the order of precedence is debated in Israel between those who say, let's get the hostages first, let them get them out first, and then we can destroy Hamas. And those who say, no, we have to press Hamas harder, and then they will release the hostages. In my experience, those negotiations about hostage release are very complicated because what Hamas really wants to do is to extricate an Israeli commitment to stop the war. And when we did phase 1 of the deal in January, we started doing it in January. We had understandings with the outgoing and incoming U.S. administrations that after phase 1, if circumstances justify it, we can go back to the war. And that's something that I think Israel should maintain understandings with the US administration. I'm very hopeful that the current efforts to bring about at least a bridging proposal, which will release about 50% of the remaining live hostages, will materialize. There's hard work on this. I think it's definitely in the cards.
Okay. On that more optimistic note, I want to thank you very much, Ambassador Herzog, for joining us and one of your first public appearances since you stepped down as ambassador. I want to thank you for all your efforts on over the years when you're ambassador and before for trying to strengthen the bilateral U.S. Israel relationship. And thank you very much. And I hope we'll have you back to talk about more of those other efforts another time.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And have a
Thank
good
you.
rest of the week.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.